March 12, 2026 began like any other day in the quiet suburban community of West Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Families went about their routines, businesses opened their doors, and parents dropped their children off at school and daycare programs. At one of the largest Jewish congregations in the United States, the building at Temple Israel was already active with staff members, security personnel, and educational programs taking place inside the sprawling complex. The synagogue served not only as a place of worship, but also as a community hub. Inside the building were offices, classrooms, and an early childhood center where young children spent their afternoons learning and playing under the supervision of teachers. For the people working there that day, the afternoon was unfolding normally. Security staff maintained their posts, quietly monitoring entrances and watching the property through surveillance cameras. In recent years, Jewish institutions across the United States had strengthened security procedures, responding to increasing threats against religious sites. At Temple Israel, trained security personnel were present on site. That decision would prove critical in the minutes that followed. Just after 12:30 in the afternoon, witnesses in the area noticed something unusual approaching the synagogue's entrance. A truck was moving toward the building at speed. At first, it may not have seemed alarming. Vehicles frequently entered and exited the parking areas surrounding the complex. But the truck did not slow down. Instead, it accelerated. Seconds later, the vehicle crashed directly into the synagogue's front entrance. The impact was violent. Glass shattered instantly as the front doors collapsed inward. Metal framing twisted under the force of the collision, and the truck forced its way into the building itself. The vehicle entered the hallway just beyond the entrance. Inside the synagogue, the crash echoed through the corridors. Staff members and teachers heard the sound of breaking glass and crumpling metal. Some initially thought it might have been an accident, a vehicle losing control. But what happened next quickly made it clear that something far more serious was unfolding. Security personnel immediately moved toward the entrance. Investigators later reconstructed those moments using surveillance footage and witness statements. As the truck came to a stop inside the building, one of the synagogue's security guards moved to intercept the driver. During that attempt, the guard was struck by the vehicle. The impact knocked the guard to the ground, leaving him briefly unconscious. Other security personnel rushed forward. According to investigators, the driver of the truck was armed with a rifle. What followed happened extremely quickly. Armed security engaged the suspect within seconds of the crash. Gunfire erupted inside the entrance hallway of the synagogue. The confrontation was brief. Investigators later said the exchange lasted less than a minute. When the gunfire stopped, the suspect was motionless inside the vehicle. He was later identified as 41-year-old Ayman Mohammed Ghazali. Authorities say Ghazali died at the scene from a self-inflicted wound as the situation rapidly unfolded. Smoke began to drift from the truck's engine compartment and interior. Investigators later confirmed the vehicle had been loaded with fuel and materials that raised serious concerns about a possible larger-scale attack. Inside other parts of the building, staff members began initiating emergency procedures. Teachers working in the early childhood center quickly began moving children away from the front portion of the building. Doors were closed and classrooms secured while staff attempted to determine what had happened. At the same time, emergency calls were already flooding local dispatch centers. Multiple witnesses called 911 reporting a vehicle crash inside the synagogue. Some callers reported hearing gunshots. Dispatchers quickly realized they were dealing with a potential active threat situation. Police officers from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office were immediately sent to the location. Within minutes, patrol vehicles began arriving outside the synagogue. Their first task was to secure the building and determine whether the threat was still active. Officers moved carefully through the entrance area where the truck had come to rest. Inside the vehicle, they located the suspect. He was already dead. But the investigation was only beginning. As officers began examining the truck, they made a discovery that immediately escalated the situation. Inside the vehicle were materials investigators believed could be used to cause a powerful explosion. The synagogue building was evacuated. Bomb technicians were requested to respond. Authorities quickly realized the incident may have been intended to cause far greater destruction than the crash itself. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives were called to assist in the investigation. Bomb squad technicians began carefully examining the vehicle while law enforcement secured the surrounding area. Streets around the synagogue were blocked off as emergency vehicles filled the neighborhood. Nearby schools were placed into precautionary lockdowns while authorities worked to determine whether any additional threats existed. Parents rushed toward the area hoping to reunite with their children. Inside the synagogue complex, teachers and staff continued escorting children to safe locations as officers searched the building. For several tense hours, investigators treated the crash scene as a potential large-scale attack site. Bomb technicians worked methodically to determine whether the materials inside the truck could activate. Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together what had happened in the minutes leading up to the attack. Security footage later revealed that Ghazali had been in the area for nearly 2 hours before the incident, appearing to wait before making his move. Investigators believe he intentionally drove the vehicle into the synagogue as a way of forcing entry. The presence of a rifle and the materials inside the truck suggested the possibility that he had planned a much larger attack. Authorities began considering a scenario in which the vehicle crash was only the first step. Investigators now believe the suspect may have intended to enter deeper into the building after breaching the entrance. The materials discovered inside the truck raised an even more disturbing possibility that an explosion could have been triggered after entry. But the plan, whatever it may have been, collapsed almost immediately. The synagogue's armed security personnel confronted the suspect within seconds of the crash. That rapid response appears to have stopped the incident before it could progress further. Despite the severity of the situation, casualties were remarkably limited. No congregants were lost. No children were harmed. The only reported injury was the security guard struck by the vehicle during the initial confrontation. Authorities later said the guard was transported to a hospital and is expected to recover. In the days following the incident, federal investigators began executing search warrants tied to Ghazali. The FBI conducted a raid on his residence, where they collected electronic devices, documents, and other materials for analysis. According to investigators, early findings suggest Ghazali may have been experiencing significant personal distress, including grief connected to family members reportedly affected by overseas conflict. Authorities are also examining possible ideological influences. Some evidence suggests he may have expressed sympathies aligned with extremist groups, including potential connections or admiration tied to Hezbollah. Officials have not confirmed that he was directly working with any organization, but the possibility of ideological influence remains a key focus of the investigation. Digital forensics teams are continuing to analyze his online activity, communications, and search history to determine whether he acted entirely alone or was influenced by outside sources. Because the target was a synagogue, investigators are also treating the case as a targeted act of anti-Semitic violence. Meanwhile, newly released images from inside the building revealed the extent of the damage. Burned walls, shattered entryways, and water damage from emergency systems showed just how close the situation came to escalating further. Investigators noted that the point of impact was not far from areas used by children earlier in the day. As the hours passed, the immediate danger to the community subsided. But the broader impact continued to unfold. Law enforcement agencies across the region increased patrols around religious institutions. Community leaders called for expanded security measures nationwide. For many people in West Bloomfield, the realization has been difficult to process. The synagogue had been targeted in a violent attack that could have unfolded very differently. Investigators believe the entire event, from the crash to the suspect being stopped, lasted only a few minutes. In those few minutes, a potentially devastating situation was interrupted. Had the suspect managed to move further into the building, the outcome might have been far worse. Instead, the rapid response of trained security personnel brought everything to an abrupt end. But for investigators, critical questions still remain. What exactly had been planned? How far was this meant to go? And to what extent was the suspect influenced by outside ideologies? With the person responsible no longer alive, investigators are now working to reconstruct intent using only the evidence left behind. Because sometimes the most unsettling question after a crime is not how it ended, But how close it came to becoming something much worse. This is an ongoing investigation, watch out as it unfolds.